I'm Kevin Flanagan. I'm the industry manager for government sales over at ImageSoft, OnBase manufacturers. And I've been working with Highland for around 9 years. And I'm probably one of the people Judge was talking about that looks a little young. And I am that way, and I've grown up with it. But I have seen some crazy things that I'm sure you all have seen over the years. I've seen people running their business with microfilm still, paper out in the tractor trailers, and in the middle of a field somewhere, having to run and open up the tractor trailer to pull records from 5 years ago. I remember once, you lived in Arizona, did this for 4 years, and we went up to a tribal authority that had a huge tractor trailer. And the guy who was with me was our scanning service bureau guy. So he knew all about what to expect up there. And apparently there's this thing called the hantavirus. Mice can get in it, and then you get... So he's taking me to Home Depot the day before we go into these tractor trailers to buy respirators. And right there I said, you can go in. I'm the guy that happens after the scanning happens, so that's your field. I'm not, because you put a respirator on me and tell me to go in the tractor trailer, I'm finding another field. But I stuck with it. I want to do a quick show of hands and see, in terms of the agenda process, anybody work for a county or city clerk of the board office who is responsible for putting the actual agenda together, generating the package, distributing it, taking minutes? How about any council members, council people, or voters? How about anybody who's submitted an agenda item trying to get something through to the board from a departmental level? Okay.
I'm IT and they just come to me. I'm one of those ones that have to do what they tell me.
Has to either. Are you asking for things too? Submitting new agenda?
No, they just come to me and say we want to do this.
Can we get this? Yeah. Well, I'll kind of cover all of that. Our agenda process, and here's a little snapshot of what it looks like. Highland has an agenda management tool that is built on some of our core technology, workflow, scanning, electronic forms, some of the things that you're probably familiar with if you're OnBase users. And I'm going to talk about them today in terms of how they fit into the agenda management process. We do have a product, and you'll see some of it today, that is specific to creating the agenda, organizing it all together, submitting all those documents that people want before they make a decision on approving some of the requests that you're making. So here's a little snapshot of our process. So I'll level set here for those of you that maybe aren't using OnBase or haven't been part of this process. I am a public works individual, and my job is to go out and fill potholes in the street. And I need a new truck because we don't have enough trucks and we've got way too many potholes. And so I have to put together the documentation asking the board to approve the purchase of a new public works vehicle so that I can go out and fill all my potholes. So I create my first form, and it says what I'm looking for and kind of what I need, but then I have to add all my supporting documentation. So hopefully at this point I've gone out and gotten some quotes from dealerships on how much different trucks are going to cost. I've gotten my 3 so I can see which one is the lowest. I've also have some data, maybe it's in an Excel spreadsheet that shows clearly we have all these potholes and we don't have enough trucks or drivers to go fill them all. And so I'm adding this all supporting documentation so that when my request goes to my department manager and to legal and to finance and finally to the clerk, county manager or city manager, they have all the documentation that they need to make that decision and add it to the agenda. So that's kind of what we call the pre-meeting process, this traveling around the city or the county, getting approval, getting reviews, getting sent back to me if I'm not clear about what I'm asking for, or people need more documentation.
I am paying attention.
Tic Tacs, anybody?
Yeah.
And then there's also the pre-meeting process that the clerk handles, which is generating the agenda, getting that out to I'll try to move around because the pole's in the way. Generating that out and sending it to the public, sending it to the council members ahead of time so that they can review the things that they're going to talk about and be voting on prior to the meeting actually happening, so that it isn't the first time they're seeing my request. And then there's also the post-meeting, the follow-up items. So if we're creating ordinances or resolutions or purchase orders or contracts, those all get sent out to purchasing department and to the lawyers to sign and the county manager, city manager to sign after we voted on those things. So there's the follow-up process. Once the meeting is over, the real work kind of starts, for lack of a better term, and we feed into that process as well. And then all of those things, agendas, minutes, all of my documentation trying to get approval for these things, is all public record and needs to be searchable either by county or city staff themselves to go find all that data or and those documents if people ask for it. But really trying to put it on the web now, and I'll show you some of that too. Making it available to the public so that they don't have to make that first phone call to call in and ask for the justification documentation submitted around me asking for a truck. They can just go look for it. So the big picture is, and the reason I guess all of this exists and why people are taking a look at trying to get their arms around the process of creating an agenda, tracking the minutes, tracking the voting, and making it all public, is that in order to champion government transparency and to let the constituents know what you're doing, there's this whole idea that decisions shouldn't be made with taxpayer money that happens in the basement or that happens in the living room of the county commissioner, which happens in Cuyahoga County, Cleveland quite a bit, where I'm from. But the whole idea is let's make it public and let's give that information to the public so that they can search for it. In Michigan, the Open Meetings Act that happened about 10 years after the federal government signed the Federal Freedom of Information Act, that you've probably heard called FOIA. Michigan came out with their own very similar, same concepts generally, that essentially said any public body needs to conduct their business and make decisions and make voting in the eyes of the public. They're invited to the meetings, we're going to notify them when they're happening. The results of those meetings, that is the minutes from the meeting, are made public. Back in 1976, it wasn't through the internet. But you could come to the office and request a copy, and we have to deliver it to you within a reasonable amount of time. In '96, the federal government came out with amendments to FOIA that said, if at all possible, you have to make those things available through computer telecommunications, i.e. the internet, basically. And that's when we had a little bit more public demand to get those things. So as soon as you could find more information online, the public wanted it faster and they wanted it more clearly searchable. And I'll talk about an anecdotal story of where we made some changes to the software to make that possible, because we had taken an initial step to make it available to the public, but hadn't gone the extra mile and made it easy for them to search for things. So the very first part of this process is the pre-meeting process, preparing agenda items for submittal. And here's a look at what our software looks like. So in this case, I'm going to create an ordinance, and when I click the ordinance button, and I'll walk through this screen a little bit. This is a dashboard for me, the person who's submitting this item. I can click a button that creates a form where I can type in everything that I want to get in front of the board. And this takes away, in some cases, people are using this in a paper process. Maybe they have a Word template that they can create to fill out a cover page or summary page, and then that gets emailed around. Some agencies are still using courier services or inter-office services. I was in an AP session before lunch, and they talked about how many government agencies, almost all government agencies that are of any decent size, are not centered in the same building. They're spread all over the county or all over the city. And so in their instance, it was invoices that come in to be paid have to go out to the people that actually ordered the product or service. And a similar thing happens here, where if I'm in a remote building and filling out my request for my truck, that has to get to the legal department, the finance department, and eventually the city or county manager or board that aren't in the same building where I am. So in some cases, that's sent through inter-office mail, and others it's a courier service. If you're semi-automated, you're routing it through email, or you're putting it to a network directory where everybody can go get it. But here we're bringing it all into OnBase and using OnBase workflow to route those around electronically, and we're tracking, we're auditing, we're applying all the things that OnBase does very well in terms of timers and notifications and letting people know that you've got something sitting on your desk that is supposed to go in front of the council in 6 days, 5 days, 3 days, so you should act on it. And the big part of this that is important to the clerks and really to anybody who's part of the approval process is the visibility that this gives to folks. Before it was, I know I've got all these items out there and I've got a meeting coming up in a day, but I don't know where any of them are. And so the clerk had no visibility into where the particular items were, but he or she knew that they were going to get all of these 2 days before the meeting was together, and then they have to put them all together and package them into a big packet that goes out to everybody. So it ended up being a very last minute thing. And in this screen, I can see my agenda items are up here at the top. These are the things that I've submitted. So as the submitter asking for something, I have visibility into what it is I've requested and where it is in the process so that I don't have to pick up the phone and bother somebody to find out where it is. I can also create a new one, and this is the electronic form. I'm sure we've probably heard today or we'll hear in the future this concept of OnBase electronic forms or Unity forms. This replaces the paper form that you're routing around and creating today for this process. I can fill out my ordinance title and my ordinance description. And these forms can be created however your form looks today, so that we're asking for, OnBase is asking for the same information that you require from people to submit these requests. I can select the meeting that I want it to go on. So if I want this done or voted on in the next 2 weeks, I can select my target meeting, we call it. The clerk, of course, always has the option to change this around if it doesn't make sense for the agenda, and they'll notify you of that. But we let people submit where they want the meeting to go. And then here's where I'm attaching my supporting documents. So in this case, I'm asking for an ordinance for consideration about renting a trampoline. So I can browse out to my computer, pull site plans, and drag and drop those directly onto my form so that all of that information is being routed around together and that I don't have a binder or folder that's being routed around where I might miss pieces of paper or things aren't getting added, or I paper clip them together and sending them around that way. So now I'm ensuring that all of these things are following around the process as one consistent unit, because I'm not going to make a decision on whether or not I should give somebody this trampoline without seeing the attached documents that they submitted. Here's where I'm creating a summary page, and these are typically Word documents. Folks call them cover pages or summary pages. You might call them something else, but it's essentially that opportunity for the requester to just gush about why they need whatever it is they're asking for, to go into extensive detail on what it is they're trying to get. And we use a Word document here because it gives you more flexibility in terms of going on your narrative. People are comfortable typing into Word. Spell checking is critical here. Grammar things are critical here because it's going to go in front of the board and be public record, so people want to make sure that they're creating a nice looking, really concise, professional summary page. But we also enable templates. So whatever it looks like today, you can build it into the template here and it populates out. That also gets added as supporting documentation to the agenda packet. And then now I've got everything that I need. I can also add documents from OnBase directly. So in that last example, I was browsing out to my desktop or my network share. Maybe it was an attachment that I had received from someone, or I scanned it in maybe. And I was browsing out to my computer and attaching it. Here I can go into OnBase and find a document. Maybe it's an existing contract with a dealership that we already have that I want to attach in as supplemental information before I buy my truck. I can move these around, so if there's a particular order that I want to sort these in. And this is important because this order is how it's going to appear on the packet itself. So when council looks at my item request, the order that I select here is going to show in the order that they'll see it on the packet. And then finally, I can submit for review. And here's where OnBase Workflow takes over. So if you're familiar with OnBase Workflow, it's this idea of electronically routing documents, records, or forms from one person to another, adding in the business rules that you have. If it's this kind of request, it should go to this place and these people. If it's this other type of request, it goes over here. So we're building those same business rules using Workflow to route this around appropriately. So if there's financial impact, it goes to the finance department. If there's not, it might skip the finance department. If there's a legal question, if it's a contract request, that kind of thing, it goes to the legal department to approve and review before it goes to the board, those kind of things. I can mark them as critical or as important or as last minute, and then they route around and maybe jump spaces in the process depending on who's submitting them. So it's essentially OnBase Workflow functionality under the scenes here. Now that agenda items in Workflow, and I can follow along my own request throughout the whole process and get a good glimpse on it. My dashboard also lets me create items that I go back to a lot. So if I'm always asking for ordinances or I'm always adding things into the process, I can save previous requests and just refresh them, add new information in, and put them back into the process so that I'm not recreating the entire thing every time I want to put in a new request. We also have OnBase Collaboration. OnBase Collaboration is a separate module, but we've built it into and given it to you for free as part of Agenda because we think it's important to foster the communication around a particular item as it's going through the review process. Collaboration is a thread forum for people to discuss something. So if I have a question on why you're requesting this piece of information, or if the lawyer wants to ask a question or give advice without it being part of the form or part of the packet, they're fairly sensitive about that, offering legal advice and having it be documented as part of the record that is made public. We have this separate opportunity for them to talk back and forth with each other, and what typically happens if they don't do this is that they're emailing back and forth. And so the correspondence around the record or the agenda item is separate from the item itself. And this puts it all into one space where they can see the item I'm trying to get through to the board and the discussion around that item, all from within OnBase. So I'm not trying to find our messages back and forth in Outlook and then also looking at OnBase to find the document. It just brings it all together. So these numbers, and this is where I talk fast to do the disclaimer about how these numbers are not indicative of every customer. But from our history doing agenda management projects for people, I put together some kind of a median of ROI that you might find from moving from a paper agenda to an electronic or automated agenda. And at the end, and I'll say this again at the end, my recommendation certainly is to work with Mike, to work with ImageSoft to figure out what this is going to look like for you. Because some of this, you might be semi-automated now, where you're emailing Word documents and forms that way, and that's going to be much better than creating paper documents and routing those through courier services, for example. So the ROI that you might find is going to be different depending on what you're doing. And so these might not completely apply to you, but it'll give you an example on what types of things we're looking for when we do look at an ROI. And then what I'd suggest, the kind of internal research that you would do to try and find this in your own organizations. So on an average in a paper agenda, about 35 hours per week are spent, and here this is all broken out per month and per year, as part of the pre-meeting. And this takes into account all the different departments, all the submitters, all the department heads, finance, legal, everybody's participation in creating the agenda item and routing it around. The transfer time from my office to the finance department, over to legal, walking into SneakerNet, all of those types of things are taken into account here. With OnBase agenda, we're taking that down to 22 hours per week. You still have to create the agenda. You still have to type in and use your brain to type in what you need. That isn't automated for you. But the movement of that document throughout the agency becomes much easier with OnBase workflow when it's electronic. And there's what that looks like broken out by month and by year. So over the course of a year, 676 fewer hours annually, and the 23.8 is an average salary of the clerk, plus the staff member, plus the department head, and legal, all kind of broken down into an easy to digest total cost of employee of $23.08, about $15,000 a year in the pre-meeting part of it. The middle part here is the clerk and deputy clerk and clerk staff portion. This is generating the agenda packets and minutes. So a lot of what they do in the paper world is gathering up all the different items that come in from people, signed or stamped that they approve at the department level, and then collating those all together, putting them all into an agenda packet, going through and numbering those documents. Maybe they have the automatic document number, like a Bates numbering system that flips through the documents and stamps onto the bottom of the page, or maybe they're handwriting it on there. We've seen that happen. And then creating those electronically in a lot of cases, so scanning it in and creating a PDF, creating bookmarks in the PDF and manipulating pages around. And all of that time, or all of that I should say, takes time. And then what inevitably happens, somebody sends in a last minute request that just has to get on the agenda. I'm sure you all have never done that to your clerk. But they have to then figure out how to slide that in and maybe throw out all the work that they've done and reorganize everything and renumber everything and generate those packets all over again. And then get that over to the agenda, or over to the council. They're then creating these agendas and packets. And so an agenda, I'm sure that most of you know this, but I'll bear with me for level setting. The agenda is just what are we going to talk about? what are the different items at a bullet point of what is going to be discussed at this meeting, and then the packet includes all of those items with all of their supplemental information. All of my quotes and my supporting documentation and my research and previous contracts we've had, everything that the council's going to need to make their decision. That's what makes up that huge packet, and it can be hundreds of pages long in a lot of cases. And then during the meeting, they're sitting there listening and adding minutes. So as different items are being discussed, they're typing in what's discussed, taking attendance before the meeting starts, who's voting on which items, and recording the voting in our agenda management product. And then those minutes then can be published out and made available to the web or distributed back to people. Here's what this looks like. This is the meeting view screen for the clerk. So on the left-hand side, we've set up a template or an outline of what the meeting looks like. And this, again, can be configured to whatever your meeting template looks like now. So you might take roll call at step 3 versus step 4, for example. So we build that in to match whatever your current agenda looks like and however your meeting is currently run. And on the left-hand side are the meeting details for the clerk. The clerk can see any meeting documents that were created for this particular meeting. So if I've already created the agenda or the agenda packet, it's linked here to this meeting date. So this is the, let's say, the February 12th, 2013 meeting documents. I can see pending agenda items. So as item requests are being approved and coming through to the system, as the clerk, I can see by the green flag which ones have already been approved, and by the yellow flag which ones are in process. So I can see what's coming down the road as I'm starting to put my agenda together in the clerk's office. So if I grab one of the approved ones, it's a simple drag and drop over into the left-hand side to add it to the right spot in the agenda. And before, this is merging a PDF together and then bookmarking it appropriately, or printing out the paper and manually putting things into the right spot. So a simple drag from the right-hand side and dropping it into the left-hand side is what we're talking about here. And then reorganizing it so I can then expand that and see all the supplemental information that the requests are added to the process, move it around if I want to, or move things around in the agenda, actual items, and when they're going to be heard. So if this is now part of the third reading and I want to move it to the fourth reading or second reading, I can move that around simply by dragging it and dropping it. And that red line that you see is we call it a drop point. Wherever that red line is where the document's going to go when you release the mouse. I can exclude certain things from the council. So an example, and I've had to respond to a few RFPs in my days, if I submit my financial information, let's say, as part of my RFP response, and I want to mark that as confidential, the RFP might hit the council agenda so that everybody can see our response, but a piece of that might be my company's financial information, and I can exclude that from the packet so that it doesn't go out as public record, for example. I can also mark things for closed session, so if there are some areas of the meeting where council is going to get together in a closed session, not open to the public, and discuss things, I could go into this agenda and mark certain items for closed session so that they're handled separately and not made available to the public when we release the document. Some numbering features and formatting features, but we're very flexible on, and these are this is a little bit of the minutia, but good to know, I think. Yeah, you can use Roman numerals, you can use ABC, uppercase, lowercase, however you typically, what the point is, however you organize and structure and format your agenda today, we try to mirror or make available to you with this so that you can start to do it electronically. And I can create my packet and my agenda. So let's say I've got all my items in, everybody submitted everything, and I'm ready to generate that agenda document and that packet and send it out to the board so that they can review it and make one available to the public so that they can review it pre-meeting. I come up here and I click this button called Generate Document, and it takes all the documents that I've now dragged over into the left-hand side, collates them all appropriately, adds text overlays to them, so if I want to do numbering at the bottom of the page, and also label each page with what agenda item it's covering, I can do all of that with with overlays here, it takes all of those individual documents that were routed around separately and puts them all together, lines them all up appropriately, numbers them all, stamps them all with whatever we want on there, and then generates out a, in the case of the packet, a PDF document that is all of those things put together. Now here you can see stamping on the bottom with numbering and with dates and item request descriptions, so that as council members are flipping through the document, they can say go to page 50 and see exactly, they're all working on the same document. It makes it easier to follow along while you're in the meeting. Similar concept to base numbering in legal area. Here is a look at attendance. So we do have the ability to take attendance. This is fairly unique to the agenda management product itself. I have all of my council members up here, and I can show who's present, who's remote, who's abstaining, and who's excused, and record that per meeting. And then calls to vote on different things. So as items are being discussed, they can take a motion to approve, and then I can record all the different voting on the right-hand side there, where you see the yes and the not present all the way at the bottom. And all of that gets recorded on an item-by-item basis so that you can see where people are voting on all the different agenda items. And then here's the after process. So as, let's say this agenda item was for a particular ordinance. When the meeting is over, I hit process agenda items, and it takes all those different agenda items, ordinances and resolutions and contracts, knows what they are, and sends them out to the different departments and different people in the county or city that need to act on it. So I might send my ordinances to somebody to sign off on. I might send contract over to legal to sign before we send it back to the vendor. It just disseminates all the things that we just voted on and for follow-up action. So a quick look at this. 65 hours per week. And this, again, depending on how many meetings you have, so people running them for boards and commissions and not just general county council. About 3,300, 3,400 hours per year. And OnBase, we're cutting that down to 30 hours a week because it's a click of a button now to not only create that original packet, but also recreate it. So when you get that last second item that comes in, it's so much easier now just to add it to the template, click a button that recreates the thing, the entire packet of the entire agenda again, and you're not recreating it by hand every time. So about 1,800 hours less annually is a $42,000 general ROI for that middle process, the during meeting and clerk portion of the agenda management process. There's something to show here. So research and retrieve. This part covers what happens after the fact. I've calculated I've captured the minutes, our agenda is created, the packet is created, and the meeting is over. And we have resolutions and ordinances and everything that went with it. But now I have people calling me and asking me how we voted on a particular issue, or what's the noise ordinance in my neighborhood for whatever. Beforehand, you'd have to go, the clerk's office would take that phone call or take that email and then go find the document somewhere. In paper world, they're rummaging through file cabinets. If they have it electronically, maybe it's stored on a network share yet and they're browsing out. What made searching for agendas and minutes that much more complicated is that a lot of times we don't capture, or it's not, the document isn't stored by what was discussed, it's stored by the meeting type that it was, maybe a county council meeting, and the meeting date itself. But those two pieces of information don't tell us when we discussed the noise ordinance on Main Street, basically. So when people wanted to find that little piece of information, they had to know when that was discussed and what meeting that was discussed on, and that's not practical in a lot of senses. So this is a live look at the town of Gilbert, Arizona's publicly available minutes and agenda and resolutions and ordinance search. This is OnBase public access viewer. You may have heard that today. Bill talked about it a little bit at his address this morning. This is our public-facing search tool. And Gilbert is the example of where we made some changes to it based on constituent feedback and by clerk feedback. So long story short, they had an individual that spent a lot of time searching for documents, really checking up on their government, wanted to see what they were up to and how they were voting on everything. And they were a very squeaky wheel. And they were written up, Gilbert was written up in a local paper about this site being very difficult to use to find things. Gilbert thought they were putting all the information out there, we're giving you all the records, we're making it available to the web, but it wasn't usable to this person. It wasn't usable to the public. They still had to know that meeting date to find out when they talked about Officer Bates, let's say. So what we did was build in the full text search capability to the public access viewer so that now constituents can search by any content on that document. So whenever an item was discussed, they could perform a Google-like search to find a word or phrase and get back the list of documents, minutes, agendas, where that was discussed. So I'm going to type in out to Arizona and come back hopefully. This also, and this is not the prettiest looking thing in the world. You can build this into your website so that it looks more consistent with your website look and feel, and just build the searching mechanism behind the scenes of it. Gilbert, I believe, was maybe a little bit reluctant because they wanted to give this person what they want, but not make it look nice for them, so they just put this up there and said, now it's functional. And this is what happens when I do that demos, I guess.
I had heard earlier that internet here was slow.
Oh, thanks. All right, that makes me feel better about the spinning green wheel.
There you go.
All right, I'll minimize it and see if we can get something back later.
Okay.
So the savings here is giving people not two things. One, making it easier for staff to find documents, which is a huge savings. But now if I can put them out on the website and self-service the public before I even take a phone call, before I even get the email, even better. They can go out and find documents for themselves, and I don't have to have staff running around trying to find things for people when they have more important work to do or different work to do. So about 15 hours a week spent looking for paper resolution ordinances, minutes, agendas, etc. 780 hours a year, down to 1 hour per week of staff time. Most of that, because we took it online and giving people access to things online, cuts that down to 52 hours a year. Savings of around $16,802 for the search and retrieval, the post-meeting part of the process. And then I talked about efficiency and automation and all of that wonderful stuff, but it's okay, I think, to get back to the basics of what we're talking about, which is saving paper, and there's still a considerable amount of value in not printing as much, which isn't as exciting, I think, as where we've gone with some things, but I still think very relevant because it happens all the time. So industry standard says a piece of paper costs about 2 cents, 1.75 cents. Printing it and consumables and toner and all of that wonderful stuff is closer to 18.5 cents over time to print a single piece of paper. So our calculation there, 3 meetings per month, and so that's the council meetings you have, the board meetings you have, the commission meetings you have, 30 agenda packets per meeting to staff that's going to show up, to clerk, to the council, the ones you're making available to the public, stapling them to the wall outside of the clerk's office. 200 pages per packet on average. We can't diminish the number of meetings that you have per month. That should remain the same. Hopefully taking you down to 15 agendas printing. Unfortunately, people are still, you still have to print them out and make them available to those who want them. I know that you know that is true. As we try to take paperless to the bench, we have to do that a lot. Same thing with council members. 200 pages per packet still comes out to around 156,000 pieces of paper a year, which is a $31,000 savings, which is crazy to think about how much we're spending printing and consuming our MFP devices. So that's my grand total before I do that. Let me see if this came up. Okay, spoiler alert. It's around 106,000 in ROI when you combine all of the different pieces of the agenda process together. Again, I'll go back to that disclaimer that this is not a guarantee, and again, trying to avoid the sales pitch. It might not work for you, You have to look at what your process is like and really dig down into the requirements gathering part with ImageSoft and see if it makes sense for you, but this is some numbers that we pulled from our existing customers. So, questions, thoughts, conversation? Please remember to fill out your survey.
Two questions.
Yeah.
The documents that you attached, those then become OnBase documents, and you index them and all that, or how does that happen?
Good question. So when let me go back there, I'll show you. I assigned these document titles to the supporting documents that I'm putting in here to make it easier on the person submitting, but these are tied to document types in OnBase. So when I put them in, they go in as their separate document types indexed into OnBase.
So that's document type.
Yeah.
That's good.
And
What about keywords?
they inherit the keywords that are on this form. So they'll go in with the agenda item. The agenda items have unique numbers that we generate when we create them to match it all up together, and they can pull the ordinance number and ordinance title. You can map the keywords on this form to be used as keywords when you bring them